absolutely, Paulette. And I do have to do this, and forgive me. You guys at Framingham Center at Seventh-day Adventist Church have a gem in Dr. Chandler. And I'm sorry to embarrass you a little bit, but it was so much of the words of encouragement of Dr. Chandler while I was in grad school at Harvard, and she that helped to buoy me through a lot of some of the challenging times. So I need to publicly say, Dr. Chandler, Paulette, you are a gem, a blessing, a beautiful soul. You just are someone who always has a positive word to say. Brilliant, you know everything, and it's crazy. You ask a question, it's like there's an question that you don't have an answer to. And just great resource, always willing to connect people with people so that we can all be better. So I just want to publicly say thank you to you, and for how you've ministered to me personally, getting me through some of those difficult times in the lab and not knowing some of the outcomes and answering questions and things. So thank you so much. And moms rock. All right. Let's dive right in. First, I need to ask a set of parameters time-wise. How much time? I forgot to ask you that earlier, Dr. Chandler.
So, yeah, we're shooting for like 3 to 4, but you can go over a little bit if we get into, questions that go beyond that time frame.
Okay, that works well. Covering a bit of ground here. So let's go ahead and dive right in. And I'm so glad to see everyone who's joined us this afternoon. I think some of you are here this morning, so I'm tickled to see more of you this afternoon. And I always like personally to say a word of prayer myself, and I know you covered us, Paulette, but this is more personally to kind of get me refocused. I was in intense mommy mode this morning, so I had to pass her off to me to focus. So let's bow our heads. Once again, Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for the Framingham Center Seventh-day Adventist Church and their ministry and their continued efforts to place health in the forefront. Continue to bless each and every one who is on the Zoom at this time. Please keep them in your care. And I pray that this afternoon provides a blessing as I share some information. We love you and we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. Can you hear me okay? I just want to make sure my audio is adequate.
Yes.
You hear me
Yes.
fine? Fantastic. Wonderful. So I'm going to cover a couple of areas, and the topic for this afternoon is healthy living through the lifespan or life cycle. And I actually interested to teach a course called Nutrition Through the Life Cycle. So what I thought to do was talk a little bit about something I call this the superhero of foods that, and there's so many foods that are fantastic, but one that I've become reacquainted and fond with, especially during COVID. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about that. Then I'm gonna share a bit on the some premises during the life cycle, during lifespan. And then I'm gonna share something called what I call the power couple, which is diet and exercise. But I'll share it in an interesting way, I'll simply say. So let's go ahead and start with, I'm gonna share an article that I wrote, and I'd like to share it with you. Let me share my screen. And if I may have permission to share my screen, I'm hoping I can. Okay, great. And so I'm going to just actually, let me do something different here. Yeah, no, I'll do it this way. This is a little more informal. And I'll do it this way, kind of. I'll give the sneak peek away. Ta-da! Something that is very basic as the lemon. Usually sometimes for us, when we think about lemons, sometimes we think about a bad car that's been sold to us, salesman, but I'd like to reintroduce to you this particular food in the context of our current situation. So just follow for a moment. Let's do this again. I'm gonna read directly. COVID-19 birthed a pandemic with fatal impact both nationally and globally. Current data suggests a disproportionate burden of illness among racial and ethnic minorities. And this is published recently in Journal of American Medical Association, as well as the CDC this past year, especially African Americans. Staying protected from this virus requires a multifaceted attack. And I know all of us are doing different things to maintain our health and safety during these unparalleled times. But nutrition is critical for protection. We must wear a mask, and I know that's a political statement for some, but it's so important. But I know in the Northeast, as a New Yorker, we have a different mindset there, but nutrition is critical for protection. If there was ever a time to increase your fruits, nuts, vegetables, grains, plant proteins, now is the time. And not just adding more colorful fruits and vegetables on your plate, but actually eating them. There are also wonderful herbs and spices and fruits that actually have antiviral activity, which is to reduce or destroy viruses. And I place a reference there as well, one of the studies that came out last year. And a few of these are lemons, lime, garlic, ginger, honey, echinacea, golden seal, cloves, cumin, oregano, sambucol, and basil. This is not exhaustive, but these are some that have been shown to have antiviral activity. Some are right in your kitchen pharmacies at this time. Have fun with them, add them to your meals, you can juice them, overall, put them in your diet, and they're wonderful foods. Now, I do need to do a disclaimer, as I say here. There's no one magic bullet alone to boost one's immune system or to address or support your respiratory functions, but working together in harmony, working together in synergy, these foods can actually be wonderful with a healthy lifestyle. So one of the fruits that I'd like to showcase that I've been amazed by is the lemon. Now we see lemons added to laundry detergent, to dish soap, to lemonade in essence, but just raw in itself, the citrus fruit has highly antiviral activity, which is why it's added to so many cleaning compounds. But it's fantastic internally as well. You can see references I placed there published in 2018, 16, this year. They have an acidic raw pH of 2, indicated there. But once consumed, and studies have shown, I placed one there published in 2017, that it actually becomes more alkaline. And so lemons are powerful. And one thing that we do in our home is actually we squeeze it in our mouths before we leave the house and when we come in. Actually, I squeeze a lot and keep it in a container in the fridge. And it's really one of our, we call it our COVID protection. And again, it's not the only thing, but it's one thing that we found to be very powerful and therapeutic. Food for thought, a published study in 1990, and obviously this was several decades ago, and because the coronavirus it's the novel one is now, but it actually, there are different forms that have existed in previous decades. There's a published in Journal of Virology that it's shown that lemons actually inactivated or by an alkaline environment. So I just want to share that with you, some studies that have been more current to those that have a historical context to that. So the take home message here is plants protect, continue to, as I know many of you are already, I'm sure, adding lots of fruits and vegetables to your plate, but consider making, especially in these times, lemons, like the way some people have salt and pepper at their table, adding lemon is kind of the daily practice, whether it's in your water, placing it on salads, a couple of tablespoons each day where you can go. Clearly, if you have certain clinical interactions, you may want to speak with your physician. If you may have some challenges taking it straight, but remember, in Christ, we make healthy choices. And stand out as an acronym for what the students here at Oak would use for New Start. But that's what I wanted to showcase as far as with the lemon, as how it is very powerful and something I've incorporated and encouraged others as well as one of those secret weapons. That's what I was looking for. Maybe that's not a good term to use today, but a great arsenal, a great ally to us that's easily available. It's cost effective. You can get a bag at the grocery store and keep that in your fridge or the table. It's obviously very decorative too, but it's useful to consume, and even little ones can take it. At first my daughter Samantha, she was a little sour with the taste, but now she opens her mouth wide and is ready to get her dose on a daily basis. So that's one thing I wanted to share. I'm going to continue. All right. That was useful for you. So the first part was about sharing the lemon piece. And that was Dr. Chandler, one of the things I wanted to share that I said, I don't think has been said yet. I know a number of other areas or topics have been presented. Part two, I'd like to share with you is some context nutrition through the life cycle. And I'm going to focus on adult nutrition. I've taken slides from a picture I've given, and then we're going to segue into another category. And the reason why I want to share this with you is to kind of lay a foundation or context, and you'll see why in a moment. Because nutrition actually varies throughout the life stage, whether from the fetus to infancy to toddler, preschooler, adolescence, adulthood to the elderly. It actually varies. But I'm talking about adulthood for the moment. And this falls into early adult, midlife, and later adulthood. So early adulthood is defined as 20 to 39 years of age. This is giving, again, context for additional information I'll share. This is a time of life where planning, buying, it's a new skill for some. And in this category, this age group, usually there's a renewed interest in nutrition because kids, little ones are involved. And so usually there's an added interest to hear more about nutrition. In midlife, which is considered the 40s, now there's this active family responsibilities. You're juggling multiple things, and sometimes you're even in a sandwich area where you're caring for your elderly parent and also for little ones. Thinking, and at this point, sometimes you're thinking about your mortality. And this has an impact on the choices we make. And that's why I'm sharing this, because the things this kind of setting the foundational benchmark, it gives context for why certain groups make different choices and see life differently. And also managing schedules kind of fit into this category where you're trying to juggle, work and making sure your kids are cared for. And a personal example, I remember, many times I would say, oh, how come, I love to cook and I enjoy cooking, and I enjoyed cooking pre-Samantha. Before the little one came along, I had a lot of theories and ideas about, vegan lifestyle and how to prepare this, and I had every recipe and I would crank it out. And then I became a mother and juggling with work. And I realized, oh my goodness, I can't even think about what to, I need something quick and fast. And my heart began to realize and I honestly had a moment where I said, I see why moms sometimes go through that drive-through and have to make quick decisions when there's someone in the back who is, I need, and you have to, revamping. And so I'm sure that different stages give you deeper, sometimes appreciation for things that you may not have considered before in the lifespan of nutrition. Then there's the sandwich generation. Again, this is not, we're not saying this applies to everyone, but this is kind of a generalization. Many are in the 50s, we call it sandwich, multi-generational caregivers dealing with teenagers, aging parents, and still working. And so this is critical because you have to eat as well. And so there's ideal, what you want to do, and then there's the real of what reality is. And so these are things that we sometimes we may think about in theory, but don't talk about when we're making ideas and recommendations, because there's this real juggle that's taking place. And then you have the added, health concerns where you might be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes or hypertension because you were doing life so much, life was happening, that you didn't realize that slowly you went from no hypertension to pre-hypertension, or that blood sugar, that's A1C level and glucose started to creep, and you didn't realize it because you were so busy dealing with a number of things. And so I want to put that in context. Then later adulthood, 60 plus, thinking about transition in some cases to retirement, a little more leisure time, but also this is a time where some individuals, they may be on a fixed income, they lost a spouse. And now instead of having two incomes, there's one. And so now the food choices may vary. Some people have to choose between, let's say, their Social Security or groceries. Some may not have to worry about that. We live in a country, the reality is that there are socially demographic differences in race, as well as economic status, where some individuals don't have to think about modifying their grocery bill. Some don't have to worry about choosing between their medication and cutting back on their grocery list. But this is an age where, unfortunately, those are real conversations that happen, or decisions that are not always discussed, but they're real. All right, and hopefully during this time, for some, there's a greater attention to physical activity. Okay, let's move on. So again, the importance of nutrition, we know this, that nutrition and exercise is a modifiable risk factor. It can influence heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and some cancers and liver disease. And the earlier we start doing these beneficial practices, the more likely we are to offset or delay or even prevent some of these chronic illnesses. Now, there are some common dietary practices that can be carcinogenic. Say, for example, we know the traditional one, smoking, what we do with our feet and our forks, There are things that can be carcinogenic, causing cancer, atherogenic, causing heart disease. High source of animal protein intake can lead to cancer, can lead to heart disease. And obesogenic, that's obviously obesogenic, dealing with obesity in essence. And so these practices can either prevent or activate these practices. Okay. All right, so the other thing I want to mention is that in the 20s, and this is talking more physiological changes that happen in adulthood, because what we do with our fork and our feet, has impact on these next few slides I'm going to share. So growing starts actually in the 20s. Some of you may be aware of this, but our bone density increases at 30, but until about 30, 35, bone density doesn't peak anymore. So the amount of calcium that's consumed in the adolescent time and a little after lays the foundation for bone density. Why is this so important? Well, hip fractures, people realize, osteoporosis and osteopenia, hip fractures, young people don't think about that at all. But the calcium that they consume, and yes, there are varieties of calcium sources, not just from the cow, which is a common, the cow milk, but we can get them from dark green leafy vegetables, which are great sources of calcium as well. But the point is that whatever you lay in calcium in your early stage of life has an impact on the strength of your bones later on. Young people say, well, who cares? Why is that important? Well, 50% of individuals who have a hip fracture in their later stage in life, 50% actually die within a year. And so hip fractures on this seemingly not seem very dangerous or serious, but 50% of those in the elderly age that have a hip fracture, data shows that within a year they can actually die. Okay. We also see peak muscular straight peaks about 20 to 30 years of age. Again, all related to what you consume in your diet. Body composition changes in essence, and then vision. All of these are kind of related to what we consume and how much we move. Then what also has changes as far as in the life cycle. There's changes with the end of reproduction. Women decline their estrogen levels, and declining estrogen levels can increase your risk of heart disease and lead to menopause. And that also can have changes in appetite. As far as the different foods that one likes to consume. But there's an increase in cardiovascular disease, altered bone mass, and increase in abdominal fat. And these all set the stage for increased risk of metabolic syndrome, which can all be averted by our diet and lifestyle. Again, bone loss begins around 40. Osteoporosis is dependent not only on bone mass, but on weight. This is one time where having a little extra meat on your bones is a beneficial thing, because weight, when you press on bone, when you weight bearing, it actually builds bone. So if you have a little extra on your body, it actually reduces your risk of osteoporosis, but it also relates to bone mass. Okay. And other thing I want to mention, which is a big topic these days, is the gut microbe. It's huge, it's related to a number of areas, and that's also connected to our diet. But I won't be spending time on that. I can talk about that another time. All right, let's go. The other thing I want to highlight from this particular, and I'll share a video on this, is that nutrition problems begin actually in the cells. In the cells. Okay, I'm going to end here. And then I want to highlight fiber. These are critical nutrients that we need more of to help avert some of the disease status. Fiber is not just your Metamucil that you add or buy in the store, but fiber is found naturally in fruits, vegetables, grains, nuts, and seeds. And why is this important? Because the more fiber you consume, the better it is for your heart, the better it is for your colon, the better it is for your overall waistline. You've heard the phrase, it's kind of a little jokingly, but beans, they're good for your heart. The more you eat, the more you fart, the better you feel. So eat your beans at every meal. Some of you have heard that before. Hopefully I got a little chuckle out of some of you. But as simple as that statement is, it reigns true, because it is cardioprotective in many ways. Okay, so I want to highlight. Oh, so one last thing I want to share before I talk about nutrition being in the cell and the power of the cell is that, as you can see here in the center, Okay. The center, we have age, sex, biological, genetic factors. Those are things we cannot change. At least we shouldn't change, particularly with the gender piece. But we know what the society we live in at this point. But those are the center part is what actually is fixed. It's non-modifiable. It's what we were born with. Then the next part of the sphere is the individual lifestyle factors. Again, this is related to how nutrition can intervene. So we have these individual lifestyle factors, then we have the social community networks and support, and then you can see the other areas that play a huge role: public safety, housing, employment, education, retail, food systems, agriculture, access to healthcare. These all play a role in our health outcomes and nutrition through a healthy life cycle. It's more than just one snapshot. It's actually a paradigm that's multifactorial that we have to keep in mind. Okay. One moment. I'm going to shift gears for a second. I'm going to share actually one of my favorite videos, and I'll tell you why. Please excuse the billion-year reference. Again, please excuse the billion-year reference. But the message, I think, speaks for itself. Wasn't that incredible? And everybody's on mute, but feel free to, when I see that, and as a trained biochemist, what it just reminds me of the amazing gift of God, and how we have barely scratched the surface in understanding how we are made. And I don't think we'll ever get to fully understand all of it, but I share it because as a biochemist, as a trained scientist in nutrition biochemistry, when I see that yes, fearfully and wonderful made, that and reminding me of the cells, I think of, for example, eating kale, which is my favorite green, and or collards, or and how the folate in the green leafy vegetable called foliage, that folate can actually influence DNA replication. It causes cells to divide and multiply. And when we eat the lonely carrot, the humble carrot, or even a mango, anything that's orange that has, beta carotene in the term beta carotene, i.e. the carrot, how the vitamin beta carotene can convert to vitamin A and cause actually cells in cells to mutate if vitamin A is consumed in high doses. But when it's in the plant form, our bodies are able to use it at appropriate levels. And I also, when I see this video, I think about nutrients such as vitamin C, which is, ubiquitous throughout citrus fruits as well as bell peppers. So vitamin C is not just in the citrus, it's in bell peppers, and how vitamin C can cause cell reproduction to make collagen, to keep our skin taut. The foods are powerful. They are biochemical reactions that are just waiting to happen in our cells to help us to thrive. And that's why the Lord gave us these foods, so that we can live abundantly and that the cells can operate in such a medicinal fashion. I just kind of scratched the surface a bit. The third area that I'm going to talk a bit about, and I debated which one I wanted to share, and I said, let me do this topic, which I think will be important in the time that we're in, because I like to share information that's equally useful, but also relevant to today. And since COVID hit, and I'm not a mental health expert, but what I do know as a public health practitioner is that since COVID, mental health crises, depression has tripled since COVID. Depression has tripled since COVID. And I served on the board and executive board at Advent Health, housed in Poplar, Florida, past 5 years. And they had a really amazing session called Conference on Mission a week ago. And I highly recommend, if you're not familiar with something called the manic monologues, highly recommend that you check that out. But as a church, and I say that as a Seventh-day Adventist church, being a third generation on one side, fourth on the other, but coming to Christ on my own at 16, I realized that mental health is something that gets kind of danced around a little bit, or not wanting to be addressed too much. And in a time now when we are isolated in the social distancing and we're not able to touch and feel each other, it's affecting all of us. And where now there's a new term for when someone asks you a question, how do you feel? The response is, oh, I'm fine. Oh, I'm fine. I'm fine. Where FINE now is an acronym. FINE actually stands for feelings I need not express. Feelings I need not express. That's what the new acronym stands for FINE. So I thought, instead of going into a lot of the biochemistry of things, I'm going to actually talk about the impact of emotion on emotion. I shared this while I was a presenter at the Loma Linda General Conference sessions last year. And it's connecting diet and exercise. And I think what I share hopefully will also be inspiring and useful in these days. So I love seeing this slide, and it's one that I've had for some time. I'd like you to look at the days, and please select, if you want to in the chat, the day that you find the most adorable, the day that most resonates with you. If you can, in the chat, this is active now, in the chat, type in the day that most resonates with you. different days that are being mentioned here, the day that most resonates with you. Everyone could do that. Yeah, see Saturday, Wednesday. Okay, very good. So I share this because, you know, we all have emotions, and emotions actually start very early in life, very early. And the objective of the next set of slides I'm going to share with you is the first one, is to discuss evidence-based data indicating how exercise and fitness provide significant impact on human emotion. And the second is what I call the power couple, how both diet and exercise improve mood and provide some hands-on real tools, what to know and then what to do. So not just information, but actual real-time information. So the cost of inactivity, I think we know the high cost of inactivity, 250,000 deaths annually. I just heard a set of data and came across it that said that in the next 50 years, or by 2025, that obesity will result in close to $1 billion worth of cost just from obesity alone, close to $50 billion just due to obesity alone in the next 25 to 50 years. Okay. Those who had never exercised have 2 times the death rates. These are numbers that I think we are all familiar with, but we know the relationship to the brain, the health, and the body, but more are likely to suffer from anxiety and depression when we're inactive, and it's harder to manage. This is a snapshot of our country, and this is not a political slide. This is looking strictly at the obesity and diagnosed type 2 diabetes in the year 1994, connecting 1994 to 2015. And what you can see here is pretty sobering, in that on the left, where it's 1994, there were states that had very little rates of obesity or type 2 diabetes. But when we dial forward, it was 20, 25, almost 30 years later, we're seeing the states, for 1 out of every 3 individuals, have rates of obesity as well as type 2 diabetes. And this is just not by chance. There's so many factors that play a role here. Okay. There's 6 types of basic emotions, and they're actually 27. They're more extensive, but I was just highlighting 6, which is happiness, sadness, fear, disgust, as well as anger and surprise. These are some of the core basic emotions, but there are several more. But I established in 1975, in essence. Let me move on here. But these are just the basic types. And so this is emotion defined, that it's a mental state that arises spontaneously rather than just a conscious effort. So emotions tend to be kind of, reactionary in essence, and accompanied by a physiological change. It's usually like a feeling or emotion, sorrow, anger. Emotion is very different. Emotion is different, it's related, but emotion is different than mood. Emotion is more, again, response to something that happened. Mood is a predominant emotion, a conscious state of mind. Very different. Okay. So why are emotions important in our daily lives? And because, for obvious reasons, they influence how we think, how we feel each day, how we make decisions. And so oftentimes we will relegate sometimes emotions to the side, but they're so critical to how we make choices, even dietary ones. So I'm going to go into the data and the do. Data and the do. And so I'm going to go through a couple of slides that discuss some specific salient points here. And first thing I want to talk about is the impact of continuous and interval exercise and how it affects enjoyment. And this was published in Quarterly of Exercise Sports Medicine 2015. And my other hat, as I mentioned, I am a certified personal trainer. So part of why I have an interest not only in diet as a registered dietitian, but also played soccer for many years, basketball, track. Don't do as much of those these days, but I still definitely get out there and play tennis and jog and run. But I realize the importance, even personally, when I'm not moving as much, how that impacts my thinking. But this study looked at 24 participants. They were, 50% men and women. They were normal weight. And they actually did an ergonometric test, in essence, a max cycle ergometer test. And they were measuring, it was a short study. It was about 20 minutes in length. And they basically looked at moderate exercise, heavy continuous, which is like weightlifting, heavy interval. Heavy interval is more like high intensity, what we call cross training, and then severe interval. So interval is more the high intensity cross training. The continuous is much more aerobic in essence. Okay. And what they found was that interval exercise and moderate continuous, the one that was actually continuous, not the weightlifting, but where they used the large muscles for like walking, jogging, the continuous moderate exercise had the greatest mood enjoyment. They didn't see the same effect with excessive weight bearing, but they saw more mood improve when there was more continuous exercise. Okay, so what is the do? So here's the day. The do is to mix your motions. Interval for great positive, it reduces boredom. So you want to not maybe do the same thing over and over, but trying to mix those motions, I should say. Okay, so weights or cardio workouts, for example, or push-ups. So these are just some examples: mountain climbers, sumo squats, star jumps, lateral raises, butt kickers, or push-ups, just giving examples. Another thing I want to share with you is a study that was published in Cell Metabolism in 2017. And I thought this was pretty powerful as well, that it was looking at high intensity exercise and resistance training over a 12-week period. And this was in all age groups, the younger age group and older. And what they found, which was, I thought blew me away, was that there was an increase not only in muscle mass, but in mitochondria production. Mitochondria is that organelle in the cell that makes ATP. It's the one that makes, we call it the one that's the energy powerhouse. The more mitochondria you have, the more your ability to make more energy. And so it was not only the muscle that was built, but they were also able to see that there was more mitochondria built when there was an increase in high intensity training as well as resistance training. Now looking at the effects of exercise on anxiety, depression, and mood. There was a meta-analysis done, and a meta-analysis is when there's multiple studies that are looked at and then they're combined. It's almost like they're put into a blender, so to speak, and grind it out, and you're able to see some outcomes of multiple large studies. And when they looked at these multiple studies, they were healthy people and also combined clinical populations and patients with emotional disorders. So this was a really landmark study that looked at all groups, and they wanted to make a conclusive outcome. And this was published in 2014. And what they found, which I thought was eye-opening, is that there was real positive effects of exercise, especially in subjects with elevated levels of anxiety and depression. And why that's important is that even at the higher levels, when there was lots of depression and the high levels, that the exercise was able to help mitigate that effect. There was a positive effect. And there was an increase in body temperature, and the thinking and the theory behind this was that it was the body temperature, more circulation to the brain, which creates more happy hormones and resulted in an improvement in mood. Okay. So what is the do? The take-home message here, the do is doing more rhythmic aerobic exercises using your larger muscles, and doing them for, a couple of times a week, 3 to 4 times. Again, jogging, cycling, finding that thing that works for you, because the idea is something that's prescriptive without interest is not going to happen. So if someone says, hey, you should do this, but you're not interested in, it's not going to ever work. So finding that thing that works for you. So walking, swimming, jogging, bicycling, okay, for example. Then the third I would share is a study that was done in 2019, just a year ago, where they actually looked at the connection between physical activity, anxiety, and depression, and quality of life in the elderly. And this was, again, looking at 50% of seniors that were engaged in physical activity, and the other half were in a community where there was no physical activity. So one group of senior citizens, they were actually engaged in physical activity at a social center. The other community, there was no physical activity. And they looked at males and females. And what they found was a pretty strong correlation, a connection between vitality, mental health, that as there was more movement, they saw that their vitality improved, their mental health improved, and it was also protective. There's a p-value of 0.05, protective against anxiety in the elderly. Okay. Move on from this one.
Oh yeah, they put us. So I just use fruits like yesterday.
Hello. Okay, getting there. Then this is another pretty and powerful study as well that looks at um, in a current daily stressor and how physical activity can actually, because most studies look at the past. This one is actually looking at if you're in your present state. And so there were some past studies that looked at how individuals, they actually remained calmer when they moved more. Their ability to manage stress was reduced when they moved more. However, these were past studies. There was a recent study that actually wanted to extend that idea, and they examined whether daily activity minimizes, lowers negative emotions that occur on a daily basis. Okay, so it wanted to see, can actual physical activity remove, lower, or attenuate negative bad emotions that occur on a to a daily stressor. In previous studies, they actually, the stressor was artificial. So in the previous study, they actually made up a stressor, and it wasn't something that was real in the person's life. In this study, they actually looked at real stressors in people's lives that were actually real. Okay. And here's what they found is that movement protects stress. And this was a large study of close to 2,000 individuals. It was called the MEDSU-2 study. And what they found is that the effect is lessened in those who remain physically active compared to those who were underactive. So when there was a real stressor in life, those who were actually physically active during the stressor had a much better outcome. And then lastly, walking in the forest. I actually love the study. This was actually done in Japan in 2019. And they were looking at brief walks in the forest, and they compared to walking in the forest versus walking in the city being the control. Now, let me just preface this. I'm in New York. I love the country and I enjoy city life as well. But city life can be very noisy, but it also can be very fun. So I'm careful in saying that. But the reality is they wanted to compare the emotional and psychological benefits of brief walks in the forest versus in city areas. And there were 60 participants, and they were randomized into 12 areas. And it was just a simple 15-minute walk. And the mean age was 21. So yes, it was a younger group. What was interesting is that the researchers said the young ladies in the study, they cannot be smoking, they cannot drink, and they can't drink caffeine. So if they did any of those things, they were removed from the study. And the reason for that is that they know that smoking, drinking, and caffeine can actually influence mood. It can influence physiological effects. So they didn't want that to muddy up the data. Okay, so they measured blood pressure, they measured heart rate, and they measured pulse rate, and they measured the profile of mood states as well as anxiety. And here's what they found. Compared to those who walked in the city, walked in the forest, their heart rate was significantly lowered. Similarly, when they compared feeling comfortable, feeling relaxed, or feeling natural, those who walked in the forest, in essence, they had a higher rate of feeling more comfortable, feeling more relaxed, and feeling more natural compared to those who were walking, particularly in the city in the study. And here's also what was really, I think, the most powerful slide, is that TA stands for attention and anxiety, D is for depression, AH is for anger and hostility, F is for fatigue, C is for confusion, and V is for vigor. And they also found those who walked in the forest, and this is just a short 15-minute walk, had those who walked in the forest, in essence, their tension and anxiety, in essence, was lower than those who walked in the city. Their depression rates were lower, their anger, hostility, their fear, as well as their feeling of confusion. But the vigor actually was much higher. Okay, so getting out in fresh air, and I know that, in the times you live in, it's somewhat of a challenge, but we can get out a bit in wearing a mask to get out and get a brisk walk, because the times we're living in, of course, viral unrest, the racial unrest, political unrest, there's so much that's going on that's a reality and a real taste of where we are. We need some outlet to deal with some of these challenges. So those who walked in the forest had less anxious, they were tense, I mentioned that, and they had better mood and lower heart rate. Okay. So it created something called a relaxation effect, So what does the do? Again, the recommendation is, park in pairs, walk in pairs, particularly if you're walking alone, making it a family affair. And Jason, so want to acknowledge my mom and brother who are on the Zoom call, and that's kind of why we had a wonderful walk the other day in New York. Thank you as well, Mommy and Jason, for being on the Zoom call. I love you guys so much, and just I am who I am because of you. And Mama, you're amazing. I just have to give a shout out. My mom is 77 and she still wears stilettos. So you can put that in the chat. But anyhow, um, walking in the forest can be a cheap date, and it's just a great, great way to blow off some of the stress. Sorry for embarrassing you, Mommy, but I couldn't help it. Shifting gears finally to the power couple, how both diet and exercise can improve mood. Am I doing okay with time, Dr. Chandler?
Yes, you're doing great with time.
Okay, thank you. All right, 2014, Dr. Singh did an amazing review article in essence and just looked at all the things that can influence mood. And food plays a bi-directional mode, but food alone doesn't play the only role. It's obesity altering, which alters brain signals, which could then affect mood. But then there's biological factors, which can affect mood. And then food intake can affect biological factors. I mean, it's a bi-directional impact that plays a role. And the study that looked into just a year ago how dietary improvements on symptoms of depression and anxiety. This was a huge study, almost basically close to 50,000 participants. And this is looking at how diet can actually improve the symptoms of depression and anxiety. So now we're not talking about movement anymore. We're looking strictly at what we do with our fork. And this was clinical and non-clinical populations. Okay? And this was highly significant that dietary interventions reduced symptoms of depression. And I just want to put a little tag here. I want to be very clear. There are some scenarios where diet and physical activity don't help certain mental health issues, and I'll talk about that towards the end. So I'm not saying that diet and exercise alone fixes everything. What I am sharing is that it can improve symptoms, and there's a difference between completely fixing versus improve. And so dietary interventions significantly improve depressive symptoms. This is highly significant. And this was observed in inactive controls. So people who moved and those who were not moving, okay, who did a lot of exercise, who didn't. So diet alone can reduce symptoms. And what are some of these increasing nutrients? So this is the $1 million question. Okay, Dr. Frazier, what are some of these nutrients that can have beneficial effect on helping us to just feel a little bit better and getting us, the edge? Okay, B vitamins. B vitamins are essential for our brain. We find B vitamins often in whole grains, not the white bread, white flour, white pasta. It's the whole grain that has the bran and the endosperm. It has everything. So the whole grain is important because that's where we get the B vitamins. The minerals, selenium, zinc, all of those, again, are in the foods that are mostly untampered. High concentration of polyphenols and anthocyanins, fancy term for plant-based chemicals that are naturally in foods. The more colorful, the more plant-based, the higher the minerals and the higher the healthy plant chemicals that are in there. Okay, potentially we want to increase nutrients that are anti-inflammatory, like the turmeric and the cumin, for example, reducing the animal-based products or the processed foods, fatty acids, omega-3s, zinc, minerals, and bioactive compounds such as probiotics. These are just some examples of how these nutrients can influence our mood. Okay. Now, what are some foods that have been shown with increased risk of depression? And this is just one study. There are several others, but processed meats have been shown. So the salamis, the cold cuts, refined carbohydrates, that's a fancy term for when you take, for example, wheat or oats and you just slice it and remove the fiber from it. So again, the cakes, the cupcakes, and again, I want to say I enjoy a good cake. My mom bakes a wonderful cake, but again, we're not trying to have these on a daily basis because they can wreak havoc within our bodies. Saturated fatty acids, saturated fats are the ones that are solid at room temperature. So saturated fats are solid at room temperature, and usually the ones that are from the animal sources tend to be the more dangerous. And artificial sweeteners. These have been associated with increased risk for depression. And the person who did this study, I love this quote. He says, our results within the study found that when dietary interventions are combined with exercise, you see an amplified synergistic effect, a greater improvement in depressive symptoms, and low mood was experienced by people. So you saw a greater benefit. Exercise was great, diet was great, but when they combined the two, we saw something explosive happen in a positive way. So foods that support a good mood. The science of how food affects our moods is based on this equation. What we feed our brains is the equation, turns on the chemical reactions and messengers in our brains that can actually lead to behavior change. It's the equation. So the foods that we feed our brains can actually create biological, biochemical reactions that can lead to positive behavioral changes. So the mood elevators. What are the mood elevators as well as stabilizers? And share with you the article that talks about this. Mood elevators, flaxseed, chia seed, walnuts. Flaxseed, as we know, chia walnuts, these are the omega-3s, alpha linoleic acid. We usually think about omega-3s, we often think about fish. And fish is a common popular source of omega-3 fatty acids. However, fish, unfortunately, the sea that the oceans that fish are swimming in now have high levels of mercury, and sometimes you can't trust it. So God gave us plant-based sources, and ALA, which is alpha linoleic acid, which is a type of omega-3, can get converted to a useful form within our body. It gets converted at a little slower rate than that's out in fish, but it's how our body needs it. So flaxseed, chia seeds, walnuts are great sources of omega-3s. And one thing that I do in my household, the way people have salt and pepper shakers, I actually have a shaker for flaxseed. And so we keep it near the stove so that, and even in the fridge so it doesn't get rancid. So we sprinkle it wherever necessary, particularly in oatmeal or in even ice cream, anywhere. So mood elevator stabilizers, argyle oil, or algal oil. I wonder if you've heard of that term before. So how do fish get, why are they a source of omega-3? So fish are a high source of omega-3 fatty acids that's great for the brain, great for the heart, great for mood stabilizers. Well, I'm glad you asked. Fish eat algae. Algae is the original source of omega-3. So algae oil, and you can Google it, it's in Amazon, it's actually an oil made from algae that is a potent source of omega-3. You don't need to get the middleman to get omega-3 from the fish. We can actually get it from where the fish get it, which is algae oil. And it's a product that's been developed. I don't have any conflict or interest or anything. I'm just actually fascinated by how algal oil is an amazing omega-3 fatty acid. And it's the same way, cows get their strength from the grass. Fish get their strength from the algae. And so that's one other method of a mood stabilizer. Berries, also very high in nutrients for stabilizing mood, all sorts of berries. Brazil nuts, brown rice, oatmeal, spinach, kale, lentils. This is giving a cacophony here. Beets, papaya, and tofu. These are all foods to show that have micronutrients and plant chemicals shown to be mood stabilizers and also beneficial in so many other areas, heart health, anti-carcinogens, etc. But these are a snapshot of some foods that have been shown research to have benefit. So what if, just kind of imagine with me for a moment, what if you took chia and flaxseed and then added some brown rice and oats and walnuts, and then you took some berries and some beets, and you took some algal oil, and that's actually what it looks like, some spinach, some kale, and the folate as well as the vitamin E that's in those, and took some Brazilian nuts and some lentils, and you took some orange juice and some soy milk. And what if, just what if, again, just thinking this is being creative here, what if after you took a walk, or after you took a run or a swim or a bike, or you did a high intensive training, what if you put all of that into a blender, all of those foods into a blender? Or even after pickleball. Now, I don't know how many of you enjoy the sport of pickleball, but I recently got turned on to it about a year or two ago. And it's one of the only sports that someone at the age of 7 and 77 can play competitively at the same time and not get injured. Pickleball is the marriage between tennis and ping pong, in essence. But what if you were to put all of these and those nutrients into a blender? You would have a powerhouse post-exercise smoothie, and you would rock. And I need to have a picture of my mom here, this lady, because my mom is cuter. But anyhow, we were bought with the price. Therefore, honor our God with our bodies. A merry heart with good like a medicine. Our bodies are his temple. And Spirit of Prophecy says, strictly temperate habits combined with exercise in the muscles as well as the mind will preserve our mental and physical vigor. We cannot give our hearts to God and keep our bodies to ourselves. I love that quote from Elizabeth Elliot. God created it. Jesus died for it. The Spirit lives in it. I better take care of it. Rick Warren. And if you have persistent depression, please don't rely on food and or exercise alone to improve your mood. Please seek medical help from a health professional, such as a psychologist, psychiatrist, or social worker, or even seek your employee assistance plan or free counseling. And a video here of Madagascar. I like to move it, but I don't know if it's going to.
I like to move it. I like to move it. You like to move it.
There you go. Here are my references. And thank you, Dr. Chandler, friend, colleague, and fellow mom, for inviting me. Thank you to the Framingham Center Seventh-day Adventist Church, Pastor Michael Henry, Elder Charles for helping me set up the message when I sent it to you. And thank you, all of you, for listening. I hope this was insightful, gave you new information, the lemon, the lifestyle, and the movement. I'm open to any questions you may have.
Well, I'll start with a question, Sherine. Thanks so much for a very informative presentation. And I love the motion and food. So if someone who has not been physically active wants to start an exercise program, how would you suggest that they plan it out? Especially incorporating, some baby steps on the dietary front.
Sure, great question. The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics has a cadre of sports nutritionists who are personal trainers and RDs. I would highly recommend not just going to someone who's a personal trainer only, and this is no negative or shade on just those who are personal trainers, but there are many personal trainers I realize that don't always have the adequate nutrition piece to it. They kind of sometimes give generic information. Sometimes they give great information, don't get me wrong. Some are really sharp, but I found that those who actually have the combination and letting them know where you are. Like if you haven't run at all for 5 or 10 years and you want to start a marathon, you have to be upfront and tell them, hey, this is where I am. I knew that, for example, after having my daughter, I wasn't active for a while, and I had one of my students become my personal trainer. And I said, listen, do not think about what I was before. Where I am now is I have gained abdominal fat, my muscle mass is less, and my upper body strength is weak. I know what I'm capable of, but that's not where I am now. So it's finding someone who also cares about you, not just going to someone, seek around a bit, just don't go to the first person, but go to someone who you generally feel a connection with. And I think that's important because everyone who offers healthcare is not caring about your health. And then also being honest about, and I'm upfront about that. I like to go to someone who looks like me. I've had experiences where sometimes that, going to groups, I didn't get the same level of attention, and that's okay. You have to be honest with where you are, what your needs are. And so again, that's the long answer to saying, finding someone who